late Russell Hartley, who also used to live in Giggleswick. And it was a rather charming story, and I just love to picture these two, Alan Bennett and Russell Hartley, in a car driving up to Yorkshire, and Alan Bennett saying, "Shall we play a game to beguile the hours?" And Russell Hartley said, "What about Botticelli?" And I said, "Oh, no, that's too competitive." He said, "I know, we have to think of the person whose underpants we would least like to have to wear on our heads." Russell Hartley said, "Colin Welland." And Alan Bennett, "Well, that's not fair, you've won already." Which, it's such a bizarre...
Now, you're now moving it from appearing in movies to directing movies. You're going to direct Val Bodies, aren't you?
That's right, yeah. I wrote an adaptation. They asked me if I could direct it.
Right. So now you're moving in with the big boys, the money men.
Well, yes. I mean, you wouldn't think there was a story that reflected any credit, perhaps you might not, on Rupert Murdoch. But I heard a story where, I don't know if you know of a fellow called William Rees-Mogg, who used to be editor of the Times. Absolutely. And he has a slight lisp like that, but I'm not going to do that because it's hopeless. He's capable of being a little pompous, William Rees-Mogg, shall we say. And at this dinner party, he was saying, "You know, I've met 4 presidents of the United States, 5 British prime ministers, 3 presidents of the Republic of France, 3 chairmen of the Communist Party, leaders of the Soviet Union in Russia. And, you know, not one of them impressed me as having a first-class mind." And Rupert Murdoch leant across and said, "Did it ever occur to you, William, that they probably thought you were a bit of a dick too?" Well, you know, it's much harder to dislike him after that, isn't it? Really.
OK, so when will this opus be finished then, the Val Bodies?
Well, we hope to start shooting in a few months, so it probably won't be out till next year, given the way things are.
Good. Well, thank you very much indeed for talking to me. Stephen Fry.
Thank you.
My next guest has been described as one of the great war correspondents. On television and in newspapers, he covered more than a dozen wars before settling for a quieter life, editing the Daily Telegraph and now the Evening Standard. In the Falklands, armed with a walking stick, he, in quotes, liberated Port Stanley. Asked to describe him, a fellow journalist said, "Imagine war, Woodhouse, and just a dash of Freddy from Nightmare on Elm Street." Ladies and gentlemen, Max Hastings. Bit of miracle music there to make you on. What was your earliest recollection or fascination with things military, Max?
Well, I suppose my father always had a very adventurous life as a journalist, and he had himself cast away on a desert island once. He crossed the Kalahari Desert. He was a war correspondent in the Second World War. And although nowadays soldiers are not very fashionable, I grew up with a huge admiration for soldiers, and I suppose in a rather self-conscious way, I wanted to be a hero. I loved the idea of doing something tremendously brave. There was one quite serious problem I discovered quite early on in my life, that one thing that was going to make it quite difficult for me to be a hero was that I found that I was actually a coward. But on the football field, we had a lot of trouble with people saying, "Get on in there and tackle the man. Go for your man, Hastings. You frightened of him." And the trouble was I was frightened of him. And I was the most frightful coward at school. And I found out very early on that I wasn't really cut out to be a terribly good soldier, because one of the things that Steve and I have in common is that we're both slightly sort of vertically challenged, in that I'm rather large, and people never like standing next to me on battlefields. And also, my left leg has never been very sure what my right arm is doing. And when I was 17, I went on an attachment to the parachute regiment. And I somehow staggered through the parachute course, although they did say that I was the worst pupil who'd ever been through the parachute course standing there. But then I was sent on attachment to a regular parachute battalion in Cyprus. And I'm afraid the awful truth was that I found out very quickly that among all these seriously tough, very able soldiers, that I simply couldn't hack it. And without going into all the grisly details, that I came back at the age of about 17 and a half from Cyprus, realizing that I didn't have what it took to be, not only, never mind a hero, that I didn't have what it took to be a soldier. And so I took to that desperate resort of villains and scoundrels that you and I know so well, and I became a journalist instead. But I've always felt that one of the great privileges of my life, although war brings out some of the worst things about man, and God knows we're all so lucky we've never had a war in our generation, it also brings out some of the best. And I've felt terribly lucky to have been able in various parts of the world to see and to write about.
But what are the best things? What is the fascination with the warrior that you have?
Well, first of all, the most obvious one, which is courage. But secondly...
Is it something that you haven't got then? Is it that you admire?
I've usually found myself tottering along behind brave men, watching what they're doing and writing about it. But I think more than, it's actually something much more, one of the worst things about journalism is it's a very selfish trade. We're all out for ourselves. We're all in the end competing with our rivals, and I'd have to plead as guilty as anybody that I've gone to any lengths for a scoop in all parts of the world all over the years. What's always moved me so much about soldiers is their unselfishness, that there's a sense of common purpose, that whether on the Golan Heights with the Israelis in the '73 war, or inevitably the Falklands in 1982, one is so moved when I look at the selfish lives we all lead in peacetime, fighting for a seat on the bus, fighting to get to the supermarket before everybody else, fighting to overtake on the M1. And then you see soldiers working together for a common purpose. And all the cliches about comradeship, about that unselfishness, come together. And I've been enormously moved by some of the things that I've seen soldiers do in many parts of the world.
In the book, you pick out a singular moment, which your book is called Going to the Wars. And what it is, it's about this story that you're telling us about now. It's about one man going to war who thought he was a coward, actually, and discovering himself along the way.
Well, I did run away quite often over the years, Michael.
All right, but I mean, you know, I did a bit of that, and I was a genuine coward. I mean, I used to sleep in a bath at night, in the theory that if they shot through the floorboard, it would ricochet off this bath and not up my backside. But but I lived in an abject fear, and I got out of it as quickly as possible. I went to about 2 wars, and that was it for me. You went to dozens of wars, so I mean, I don't buy all this stuff about you being a coward.
When you get towards the end, after the fall of Saigon, I felt I really wouldn't do this again. I'd done, I forget how many, 8, 9, 10 wars or something, and I started to write books for a living. But then, when the British task force was sent to the Falklands in 1982, I felt I've got to go. I've always admired the British Army enormously, and I want to see them do this extraordinary thing. And I fought tooth and nail to get to go with them. And it was one of the most moving experiences of my life.
Well, you write movingly about it in your book, where you say there's one moment as you approached, where you were going through the ocean, where you went up, well, tell me the story, you went up on deck, and it justified your decision to become a war correspondent.
Well, you feel, one night, just before we landed in the Falklands, that I woke up in the middle of the night, I couldn't sleep, so I put on my clothes, and I went up to the bridge of Canberra, and the whole ship, 3,500 men, was asleep. And there was just the officer of the watch and the helmsman on the bridge, and they nodded to me, and in the darkness out there I couldn't see anything. But I went over to the radar repeater, and I looked at the screen, and there on the screen one saw these sea slugs crawling across the screen, which of course were the convoy of ships in which we were, and I thought, the eyes of the whole world are watching and wondering where we are in this convoy at this moment. We're about to do one of the most extraordinary things that's happened in British life since the Second World War. And it did seem, although I had the gravest doubts about the merits of the operation that Thatcher had launched in principle, I found it so moving to be with the British on this great adventure. And it was a great and extraordinary adventure. One was seeing sights that one never thought one would see. One of the things that always one can't help making one laugh in wars is that all the people I was with, we'd all been reared on all these old black and white war movies about how the British were expected to behave. And so the way that everybody talked was very much the way that the scripts were in those movies. For example, one day I was up on the bridge of one of the warships during an Argentine air attack. And after a near miss, an Argentine bomb had gone whoosh in the water beside us, all bloody terrified. And the captain turned to the bridge, said, "There's only one thing to be said for this business. When it's over and they make the movie, there will be no part whatsoever for Robert Redford." But what I would say, it is, you do have that enormous sense of privilege that although one has seen some people do terrible things in parts of the world, I'll cherish all my life, having seen the Israeli army defend the Golan Heights in '73 and having seen the British do incredibly well in the Falklands.
Would you, sorry, would you agree that, but to me, one of the the crowning glories of the British Army is banter, which sounds a rather a trivial thing to say, but the glue that holds it all together is the extraordinary good humour. And we sort of know this as part of the British character, whether it's on the football terraces or anywhere else. But if it were not for the humour, they would not be the same men that they are, would they?
Oh, the jokes are always absolutely wonderful, and it always feels ridiculous. You have these moments of absolute terror. I mean, for example, once I was at the Commando Brigade headquarters when it was bombed by the Argentines, and we all lay flat, absolutely petrified, while the Argentines dropped bombs around us, literally 30 to 50 yards away. And when we all got up, very frightened, and all the tents shredded with shrapnel and so on, and miraculously nobody killed. And Julian Thompson, the brigadier, turned to the air defence troop who had these blowpipe missiles. He said, "Where was bloody blowpipe?" And they said, "Sorry, sir, weren't ready." And he said, "It's like trying to shoot bloody pheasants with a drain pipe." Again, this is all terribly British, but I am very British, and I love it.
I am one of them describing a similar situations, but I think none of us was alone in our trousers. That's always a very good way of saying it. But the trouble with the SAS is that they are probably tremendous people. It's the members of Parliament and members of the public who regard the SAS as a kind of masturbatory fodder. I mean, they're wank mags. You know, they're so crack. They're the crack. Actually, the SAS are the most crack. They're the more crack, more elite than any other force in the world. Yes. And I think if you went into a bookshop, and every day, anybody who went near the Special Forces and SAS books, you just quietly rounded them up and arrested them. There would be nothing wrong with this country.
They get the wrong end of it.
It's the worship of the butchness and the crackness of it that is so horrible, isn't it?
Did you ever find, though, like Max, that you wanted to go out and prove to yourself by being a soldier that you were a brave
don't know about
person?
you. Are you homosexual?
Not at the moment. No. I'm thinking about it, Stephen.
Mike, you are? No, you're not.
I used to be when I lived in Barnsley.
That's right. I'm very much what a chutney ferret, as they nicely call it. But, and obviously one of the things about being such is you do question your own maleness. I mean, however obvious, sure. I'm not the effeminate type of but you always think, am I a man?
Joining the SAS.
I was in the school corps and went on field trips and things, but all right, daisy chains rather than blowpipes. But in fact, funny enough, when with this whole debate about gay people in the forces, if anything is slightly upsetting, is you might argue that perhaps the one man above all who shortened the Second World War was Alan Turing, who was responsible for the real breakthroughs that cracked the Enigma code, that certainly won the Battle of the Atlantic and much else besides. And he ended up committing suicide because he was gay. And the idea that the gay people are not fit to defend their country is so nonsensical. But that serious point aside, this idea of when you might be, I don't know when you decided you were heterosexual, but certainly I can say, when the moment of being born and looking up and thinking that is the last time I'm going up one of those. Sorry.
What is the point you're making?
But the point I'm making is one does question oneself. Because one of the ironies is that straight men, you breeders, you heterosexuals, spend your lives pushing your heads into other people's bottoms in a rugby scrum and standing around naked in showers while us homosexual types like to watch Doris Day and Barbara Stanwyck and Judy Garland, which is a bit peculiar. In other words, straight men like the company of other men. And one of the things that frightens, I suppose, a gay person growing up is they're not sure of their place in society, whether being gay defines them as something other that they must always be, whether they ghettoise themselves or whether they actually just want to be accepted and then they can be like everybody else. Which is
one of the things I would say, Stephen, about soldiers is that although they talk an awful lot about sex, in my experience, I think that if you offered most soldiers on the battlefield, when they've been awake all night, a choice of a bed on their own, a hot meal, and being put to bed by mummy, on their own, they'd settle for being put to bed on their own with mummy rather than the most beautiful woman in the world.
The idea that our soldiers, if instead of killing the enemy, went to bed with him, I mean, where would that leave us?
Hang on, in the 60s, mate,
it'd be rather good, wouldn't it?
Yes, exactly.
No, I greatly, what you say is, I mean, there is a word glory that you can only really use about man at war, but there is also the worst that we can do.
But one has to say, Stephen, nobody could fail to be, despite, and one of the things I'm most anxious that in what I write about wars, nobody should ever think that one feels that, that wars are a good thing. We are fantastically lucky. When I hear people complaining about how difficult it is to be young now, unlike our parents, our grandparents, our great-grandparents who had to go through all this. And the other day, I had a letter the other day from somebody who'd read one of the extracts from my book in the paper. And I'd written about a landing craft crew that I'd met in the Falklands whom I liked tremendously, and who one morning when I was utterly exhausted and I was just catching a ride from them somewhere, that somebody's head popped up to the hatch. He said, "You look hungry." He said, "You want some bacon and eggs?" And I practically burst into tears. I was so moved, again, by this unselfishness and by this being willing to, it was keen to help. But anyway, the other day, I had a letter from somebody who said, "I read that account about their landing craft crew, and it was my son who cooked you bacon and eggs and who was killed a week later." And what one is so aware of all the time, you talk, yes, one had extraordinary adventures and one feels very lucky to have seen these things. But for anybody who loses a son,
yes, but
war is the
you
most
see, I
thing
think Bertrand Russell had it right. When he was opposed to the First World War and people wrote furiously to him and said, you know, our sons are dying or whatever, the sacrifices they're making. And he wrote to, I can't remember which newspaper it was, he said, "No, can't you see the sacrifice we are asking our young men to make is we are asking them not, it's not that we're asking them to die for their country, we're asking them to kill for their country." And in a sense, the thing that there's the greatest luxury you and I have is that we've never been asked to kill. And that's actually the hardest thing to deal with. And that's why when you meet people who've been in war, they don't talk about it. You always think, "I met this Battle of Britain pilot." He won't say a word. The reason is not because they're so modest, and some of them are, of course. It's because they are still living with the fact they pressed a button and someone's face exploded, a young person like themselves. And however much we kid ourselves, killing people destroys us. And it's not, of course, when we lose a son, it's terrible. But it's terrible that we ask all our sons to kill.
I suggest you read the book, actually.
I'd love to. A publisher price?
No, but it is. It's a very, very good read, and it's.
He's my boss. He got me a job. You know,
he was my boss too.
Yeah.
you should have stuck at it. I mean, you were coming on very well as a journalist, Stephen.
Well, that's sweet of you. You know how to be rude to a chap, don't you? No, I had a great time.
Max Hastings, thank you very much indeed. Max Hastings. The book, if you're interested, is called Going to the Wars. Lovers of the musical theatre will be delighted to learn that a new production of The King and I opens in the West End in May. Playing the governess is the girl from Barnet who became a star playing in Evita and Cats. The lead in Sunset Boulevard gave her Broadway. Performance in Piaf established her as an actress who could sing rather than a singer who could act a bit. Welcome, please, Elaine Page.
You're lonely. You cry the long night through. Well, you can cry me a river, cry me a river. I cried a river over you. me out of my head. Well, you never shed a tear. Remember, I remember all that you said. Told me love was too plebeian. Told me you were through with me, and you say you love me just to prove that you do. Come on and cry me a river. Cry me a river. I cried a river. I cried a river Gosh,
Do you feel...
you've got the tallest people in the world. Be one of the shortest.
I know. Does size matter? I mean,
Does size
yes.
matter?
I mean, it's a serious question. I mean, does being small...
Well, I've certainly got the shortest legs here, that's for sure.
Yes, you're a good foot off the floor, actually.
I think it does, you know, in
what
all
way?
seriousness.
Right.
I really do think it does. I mean, I'm sure if you're... I don't know how tall you are. You must be 6'5".
6'5", much too tall. I'd love to split the difference with you.
Oh, no, darling, I like tall men. However, I do think it does make a difference because, you know, if you're up there, you're viewing the world, obviously, literally, from a very different viewpoint. And all I can tell you is that down here, you have to sort of shout that little bit louder and make that little bit more effort, I think, just to sort of, you know, be taken notice of at all, I think. I think it is harder.
Makes you more determined.
Probably
yes,
it does, yes, I think so.
Well, what about the working with lady men who are taller than you? I'm much taller than you. I mean,
Well, yes, it causes problems, you
Like?
know. I mean, first of all, you get neck ache quite often. And, but I remember some time ago now when I was in hair, it causing a particular problem. And if you remember, it was a show where there was a nude scene in it, and of course the entire company, it was a voluntary thing. You didn't have to do this as a company member, but needless to say, eventually the entire company had played in this nude scene, and I was being a complete wimp and hadn't gotten around to it, and they were all sort of rather, well, they were teasing me rather and making me feel even worse about it. And so in the end I thought, oh, well, there's no hope, I'm going to have to do this. And so I made up my mind I would, and this terribly nice chap in the show, Gary, I think his name was, and he said to me, listen, you know, I know you're really nervous about it. He said, what we'll do is that if you like, we'll stand at the back of the stage, and he said, and I'll stand next to you and hold your hand, you see. And, well, Max, would you stand up a minute with me, darling? So you can pretend to be Gary. But he was about as tall as you see. And so there we were. At a given point, you see, in the show, we had to take all our clothes off under this...
We're not going to have to do this bit, are we?
No, you don't have to do anything. I promise you, you're safe. But we had to sort of get our clothes off underneath this tarpaulin thing.
Yes.
At a given point, rip open this Velcro strip, you see, and sort of come up and be reborn. And needless to say, I did my stuff, you see, and I stood there stark naked, feeling terribly vulnerable and panicked. And I sort of said to Gary, oh my goodness, he says, it's all right, it's all right. And I put my hand out to hold his hand. And I wasn't holding his hand.
Lucky Gary.
You see the problem.
I do see the problem. You're not having that problem, of course, in the current show, are you? Or the one that you're rehearsing now, which is The King and I. What's you got? What's your leading man like there? Is he?
Oh, he's marvellous. Jason Scott Lee, his name is. He's an American actor, and he's come over especially to play this role. And he's going to be quite wonderful, I think. It's a fantastic rehearsal period we've had.
And I suppose what the marvelous thing about doing something like this, I mean, the tunes are. You were talking about Miss Andrews earlier on, but I mean, all the tunes are so familiar, aren't they? It's like watching a Julie Andrews movie.
It's a fantastic score.
Yes.
I mean, when I was first asked, you know, if I might like to do it, I have to admit that it's not something that I initially thought I would like to do, particularly. I wasn't actually looking to do any more musicals. So I was asked if I would look at it, and of course the first thing I did was dig out the old, you know, the score and play the CD, and you forget. I mean, it's the most wonderful songs. There's I Have Dreamed, Shall We Dance, I Whistle a Happy Tune, Hello Young Lovers.
Wherever you are.
Wherever you are.
It goes on to say, I believe.
Yes, it's a bit of a tricky one.
And it's also quite funny, isn't it? I mean, the relationship, there's proper acting. The relationship with the King and Anna is all that, et cetera, and all that. Yeah.
But of course, the other thing that I think a lot of people forget, that it is based on true story. Yes, these people did exist, and so it's a part of history set in the 1800s, and so there's that interest of the clash of the cultures, and her, she's very feminist. I mean, really, she must have been one of the first feminists.
Very modern woman, absolutely right. Yeah.
And so there's all that. So it's actually quite modern in many respects, and as you rightly point out, Stephen, it's very funny.
Because you're talking about size defining your career. I mean, you for many years when you left drama school, you played children. You were in your 20s playing children, weren't you?
Absolutely. Oh, and longer actually. I mean, yes, for a long, long time, because. Luckily, I don't know, but anyway, I've always sort of looked younger than I am, and particularly, obviously, when I was in my teens, I looked 10. It was most irritating at the time, but it's growing on me now, so to speak.
And then, of course, Evita was your big break. It was almost kind of a showbiz legend story, that wasn't it? I mean, it was the way it happened, that all of a sudden, you weren't just plucked from the chorus line, but I mean, all of a sudden, overnight, you did become that star, didn't you?
Yes, well, it was a funny thing, really, because just prior to it, in fact, I was seriously considering giving up the profession. Oh yes, because I had always done rather well at bits and pieces and working, but just prior to Evita, I had a really sticky time, and I think I was out of work for something like 6 months, which was probably the longest time I'd ever been out of work, and it was one of those periods in my life where everything seemed to go wrong. You know, my agent dumped me, my boyfriend dumped me, the car broke down, and the curtains fell down. Everything went wrong, you know, and I didn't have any money to be able to fix the immediate things, and so it was a rather difficult time. And
did anyone persuade you to stay on?
Yes, I met Dustin Hoffman actually, and he
Stop sniggering.
What's funny? He's short.
I was picturing you as this poor, starving student, and then I met Dustin Hoffman.
Well, that's
This happens in showbiz. It happens in showbiz.
It does happen, doesn't it?
Showbiz story. It's a fairy tale.
Great. No, I mean,
Well, I could tell you how I met him, but we'd be here for a week.
No.
However, so, you know, I met him, and he likes to play the piano. He's a concert pianist, and so he said to me that he'd written this song with Bette Midler, and because I told him I was a singer, and I don't think he believed me for a minute. And so he said, "Well, I've got this piano in my room. Do you want to come and sing this song?" And I thought, this is the best line I've ever heard. So I thought, oh well, it is Dustin Hoffman. I'll go and sing for Dustin Hoffman. And so that's what happened. And he said, and he gave me such encouragement and said to me, you know, you really must, you know, and then I sort of told him what a terrible time I've been having, and he said, you must keep going, you know, whatever you do, don't give up, sing on the streets if necessary, don't give up. And so that really did encourage me at that dreadful time in my life to have this huge movie star, I mean, I don't mean physically, but, you know, he was a big, big star, and still is, of course, to take the time out to enthuse and to encourage me and to give me a bit of, you know, so, and then, of course, Evita came along, and that sort of saved the day, really. I think it was partly due to him, in that he, you know, said, don't give up.
It also, again, interesting that you had all the success in Evita, but the one thing that eluded you was Broadway.
Yes.
For all kinds of various union reasons, and God knows what else.
odd, really.
Yeah.
For something like almost 20 years,
Yes.
from Evita to the time I went with Norma Desmond, Sunset Boulevard.
You must have wanted very badly in Broadway, didn't you?
Well, I did at the time, with Evita particularly. I really did want to go with that, because I felt very possessive about that part then.
Sure.
And I really did want to go, of course I did. And of course then it didn't happen, and I was pretty mortified about it, I had to admit. But, you know, this profession is what it is, and you kind of get over it and go on, and you know, and I then went into Cats, and I had all these other marvellous shows that I've been able to play here in London. And I kind of forgot about Broadway, really. It didn't sort of, I wasn't holding it up as some, you know, wonderful place to go and play particularly, until the press started writing about it and saying, you know, this poor girl, she's been cheated for so long and she wants to go, and, you know. And then I thought, maybe I would be nice, yes. And then I still didn't think about it. And then Andrew said to me, you know, would you like to go and play Norma Desmond
And
there?
I mean, opening night on Broadway for you was, again, the stuff of legends. I mean, it was...
Well, it was pretty
Tell me.
amazing, but it was certainly worth the wait.
What happened?
It was remarkable.
Opening
I mean, I think they did not publish exactly the first performance that I would give. They left it sort of open to make sure that I was comfortable and settled, because the stage and everything was completely different size, and we had to kind of rehearse it all. And so they left it open. And anyway, so on the particular night that we decided that this would be the night I would perform, they made an announcement to the audience, and they all went, you know, this big gasp, and I thought, crikey, this is it, I've got to, you know, prove it now. And then I sort of came down the huge staircase, and the place just went completely berserk, and I wasn't prepared for this at all. I mean, nobody teaches you what you do. How do you stop an audience from applauding and making all that wonderful noise? I mean, it was wonderful.
How do you start is my question. But that is wonderful.
It was wonderful, because I hadn't even done anything. But I went into a panic again, thinking, crikey, now what do I do? I don't know how to begin. Anyway, so I came up with this marvellous thing. I went, and they all went.
Did you invite Dustin Hoffman to come and see you on Broadway? I think at some point. I mean, does he know how grateful you are to him?
No, but you know that the funny thing is that with Evita, about 9 months later, after having first met him, I had related the story of meeting him and how he'd encouraged me to one of the members of the company of Evita. And in the interval of Evita, the first night, I'm standing in the quick change room having this huge ball gown put on me, and this girl comes running over to me, Myra Sands, and she says, he's here, he's here. The cherry on the cake, because I had said something about, wouldn't it be marvellous, the cherry on the cake would be wouldn't it be weird if he happened to be here? Never dreaming, you see. She said, the cherry on the cake's here, the cherry on the cake's here. And I said, Myra, what are you talking about? Talk sense, what are you talking about? And she said, he's here, he's just been backstage, he's in the audience. I went, but anyway, he was the first person to come backstage after my first performance of Evita. And said to me, "You've got there, didn't you?"
Do you know the joke, the Dustin Hoffman joke, as it were?
Is it family viewing?
Just.
Is it?
It's a film producer, and he's his friend. He said, "I'm so excited, I'm making this film. It's so great. I'm so thrilled." The guy says, "Really? Who's in it?" He says, I've got Hoffman." He says, "What, Dustin Hoffman?" He said, "No, Justin Hoffman. But he's a really promising young actor. And Streep is playing the female lead." What, Meryl Streep? Beryl Streep. She's really good. She's really good. And, you know, and I've got, got Blair as a character part. What, Lionel Blair? Yeah, that's the twat. Silly joke.
Oh dear, Piaf.
There's no need to get like that.
Yeah, I just thought
that was a wonderful show.
Musical relief, because you did Piaf, and you still do Piaf, and it's your favourite part. It's your favourite part.
Oh, it nearly killed me.
Why?
I mean, it did kill her, this life she led. I mean, and I tell you, trying to do that 8 times a week really did nearly kill me. Yeah. It was terribly emotional, because, you know, this woman led the most extraordinary life. Yeah. Had young lovers for no longer than a few months at a time, and well, that's not such a bad thing. We can handle that, But of course, she took drugs, and she was arthritic. And
well, where do you get that voice from? That sort of that Piaf voice?
The vocal coach that I had. I mean, I don't speak French, so I was in deep trouble, and I thought, I don't know how I'm going to sing many songs in French. It's quite difficult to remember what you're singing about. And so I had this marvellous chap called Michel Vallat, and he would come on a daily basis and go to me, and I would go, and he'd go, no. He got so ratty and irritable with me. And then he'd go, again, and again I would go...
Is that the orangutan cane?
I kept going, I was oohing for weeks on end, and
Well,
apparently never got
supposedly
it.
is you say E, as in E, but with your mouth and a whistle. E. E.
You say E with you like...
Yeah,
with-
that's how the French
How
go.
do you know all this clog-eye?
Ooh,
I mean, it's amazing.
E.
Yeah, G, G. The French E sound is them saying E, but with their mouth like that.
E.
All right, go on.
And if you want to sound like Arthur Askey, saying, this is a very interesting one, this is about the English language. You know, I thank you was his like, I thank you.
Hang on.
Say it by saying the word nightingale. Nightingale. Nightingale.
Nightingale.
It works. It sounds like I thank you. Nightingale.
Nightingale.
You do that.
Oh, yeah.
Try it at home.
There you go.
Nightingale.
Is there anything you don't know about?
No, there's absolutely nothing.
So clever.
Bit of Piaf.
What, you wanted to hear my E accent?
I do.
Accent.
I do. Monsieur Holloway.
What is it? What, B flat is it? Go on,
B
give me the B
flat.
flat. Mon Dieu, mon Dieu, mon Dieu, laissez-le-moi encore un peu, mon amoureux. Un jour, 2 jours, 8 jours, laissez-le-moi encore un peu à moi. Le temps de s'adorer. Oh, etc., etc.
Well, it's nobody would ever know you couldn't speak French.
Your mother is afraid of wardrobes.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Much enjoyed talking to us. Lovely. Elaine Page. My thanks to Elaine Page, Max Hastings and Stephen Fry. That was the last show of the current series. We're back in September. We finished with a personal indulgence, a big band classic featuring some of the members of Mr. Holloway's assembly of strolling players who attend our show every week. Until early autumn, from all of us here, good night. Good night.
We're sorry if you're expecting Shirley Bassey. Unfortunately, she wasn't able to take part in tonight's Parkinson. However, captured on camera during a whirlwind winter tour, you can see the star next on BBC One.